Recently, the Society for Vascular Surgery has decided to put together a video history of the development of our society and our specialty, and in doing so, we'll interview a number of the leaders and innovators, many of whom are retired now, and get their perspectives on the development of the treatment of vascular disease. That initiative is being led by Jim Yao, Roger Gregory, Cal Ernst, Norm Rich, and others, and is designed to have a readily accessible archive of voice and video images of the leaders and innovators in the field, so that people in the years to come can go back and get a better feel for the beginnings of vascular surgery. Today we have John Towne with us, who just retired a couple of years ago, lives in Carbondale, Colorado, and really served his entire professional career at the Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and was involved with all kinds of things from the sort of the beginning of modern vascular surgery up until the present. Welcome, John.
Good to be here.
How did you ever get interested in vascular surgery and vascular disease in the first place? During your residency, or?
No, actually it was when I was in college. My junior year in the spring, I came down with a bad case of mononucleosis and had severe hepatitis with it, and spent 3 weeks in the University Hospital in Pittsburgh. And while I was in the hospital, it was a 2-bed room. A guy named Bernie Fisher, who is best known for breast disease, but also was a vascular surgeon at the University of Pittsburgh. He did a fempop bypass on a guy with a dark toe, black toe. And the patient was obviously very happy to have saved his, toe, his foot, and his leg. And I thought that was really pretty neat. And so I think Bernie Fisher probably was the first person to, interest me in doing vascular surgery.
And then you ended up, after your residency, training with Jesse Thompson.
Yes,
in Texas, and I bet that was a pretty interesting experience.
Well, it was in a variety of ways, because I had a full buried plan deferment for general surgery, and then following my general surgery training, I went to the Air Force for 2 years, and that gave me an incredible operative experience as a general surgeon, because we were in essentially a 60-bed hospital in Vandenberg Air Force Base, and we did a lot of surgery. And then following that, I went to Dallas for a year to work with Dr. Thompson.
How many people were in practice with Dr. Thompson at that time?
Well, his group had 3. It was Dr. Thompson's the senior one, Don Patman was the number 2 one in age and tenure, and Al Pearson was the 3rd. And then those 3 surgeons teamed up with a man named Leroy Kleinsasser, who was in solo practice. And so those 4 surgeons split 2 fellows. And the fellow I work with was Robert Batson, who's actually now chairman of surgery at LSU.
That was right at the beginning of the vascular fellowship training, the formal vascular fellowship training programs.
It was early. The year I did my fellowship, 74 to 75, was the first year of the Northwestern program, when Richard Dean was your first fellow here. Dr. Thompson's fellowship, by the time I think I was the 10th or 11th fellow, and he had started, Mark Karshner of Tucson, who helped with, he and Lauren McCrae had invented the OPG machine. He was Dr. Thompson's first fellow, and sometime, in the 60s.
What operations were you doing with Dr. Thompson during your training?
Well, we did the gamut of it. Obviously, he was a master carotid surgeon, and I think I technically probably learned most from him in carotid surgery. He was a good aortic surgeon, a very careful surgeon, but a very good surgeon. And and distal-wise, he did fem pops. He didn't like to do tibials, but because he didn't like to do tibials, he was an absolutely phenomenal profunda surgeon. So Dr. Thompson could do the most incredible profundoplasty so he wouldn't have to do a tibial bypass.
Did he do a lot of volume himself?
Well, I tell you, he did 130 cases, and the way the group was, I went over the records, each of the three Thompson partners did between 100 and 130 and 140 major cases a year. It was amazing how it worked out.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't a big volume in Houston numbers in terms of what Dr. DeBakey's group was, but in terms of, I thought, three guys in private practice, it was a good experience.
What was Dr. Thompson's really well known for carotid surgery, obviously, and what was his style of doing it? Did he shunt everyone?
He shunted everybody.
And what kind of shunts did he use? And tell us something about the detail of those from
Well,
your memory as a fellow.
Dr. Thompson had the most incredible judgment of any surgeon I've ever worked with. And there was a saying in the hospital, in Baylor Hospital where he worked, if you want an operation, ask so-and-so. But if you really want to know what should be done, you ask Dr. Thompson.
Right.
He was a very meticulous surgeon. I mean, he clamped and tied, and he was a slow surgeon. Mm-hmm. He always had control. And it was amazing how he had control. I can tell you in the year I was there was not a stroke. We never took one of Dr. Thompson's patients back to the OR. And I never saw a graft infection. Now, obviously, we all know that all of those things happen, and obviously Dr. Thompson's stroke rate wasn't zero, but in the time that I was there, and it just kind of gave you an idea of how he approached things. Mm-hmm. And so his system of care was I thought very good. And the way he operated, he wasn't flashy, he didn't take chances, he thought through things well, and he was a moaner and a groaner in the operation. Like if you're doing something and you get in the iliac vein, he's, "Oh, John, you killed him." But if you listen to him, you say, "Oh, things are crazy." But if you watched him, his hands never moved any faster. He did what needed to be done, and next thing you know, you're out of trouble. And so, and he never lost a patient on the table, according to my memory. Now, obviously, it's been some years since I was there, but he was a very special guy. And what I particularly liked about him was that Dr. Thompson was a distance runner. And he ran track and cross country for the University of Texas. It was obviously a first-rate athletic institution as well as an academic institution. He was captain of the track team. And I was a distance runner as well, and I was kind of short, and he was short, so
you could relate.
Oh, and he had the mentality of a long distance runner.
And then tell it, what kind of a shunt did he use?
Just a straight tube. It's nothing fancy.
Uh-huh.
In fact, there was kind of when I finished my fellowship, he gave me two things. It's oxygen tubing, that's what it was. Yeah. He went to the shelf and pulled off this oxygen tubing, and that's what you trimmed it up. Sometimes you can flame the edge. That was the shunt. So, and I still have that, And the other thing he gave me was he used to have a tartan plaid thing that you had lunch in. There was a plastic thing for sandwiches and then a thermos. And Mrs. Thompson would fill the thermos with Coke, and she would make him sandwiches. And so every day he brought that, he'd bring it in the OR. And sometimes during the case, we'd have Coke, poured out. And he gave me one of those when I finished, and I still have that. I treasure that because, it's just, it's the way it was. I mean, here's a very special guy who wasn't beyond brown bagging it, so to speak, to come to work.
Now, you were in the Air Force, along with military experience for most of the surgeons who finished general surgery in that era. How did that influence everybody? the military experience?
Well, I think I graduated medical school in '67, and essentially, if you're going into medicine, everybody was going to get drafted, and I've known a couple that didn't go, but and so you had to try to figure your options, and I personally thought I'd rather spend my 2 years in the military as a trained surgeon, fully trained surgeon. So I applied for the Berry plan, and I wasn't brave. I liked the Air Force because I like blue uniforms. And generally they put the surgeons where they put their jets, which is far away from any Viet Cong.
Yeah.
And so I'd be more likely to survive the Vietnam War. And the thing was, the way the Air Force was doing it is obviously it's a 2-year commitment or 2-year hitch. And they would send you to Vietnam the second year. And my second year, about 3 months before that, the Surgeon General of the Air Force said he was not sending fathers, surgeon fathers, to Vietnam anymore. So I went out and bought a peace rose, and the first rose I buy whenever I move, I do roses. I'm interested in that, is a peace rose, and I have a peace rose right now in my yard.
So do you collect hybrid tea roses, or?
Yeah, I have 9 bushes now. That's all my wife will allot me because she's in charge of the garden, and she guards that space very jealously. And so I figured out how to grow roses in the mountains. I lost them all the first year, and then I started asking around, and I didn't lose any last year. So I think they're pretty. They're one of the most beautiful flowers there are. I think there's a lot you can do with them, and I just have always grown roses.
What other hobbies are you pursuing now that you're retired? You were telling me about your woodworking.
Well, I can tell you, first of all, that I have so much to do, I don't have time to do it. Now, first of all, I don't get up early in the morning, and I get plenty of sleep every night. So, in terms of the things I do, I've always been a woodworker. That's how I got into making gavels and what have you. And so now that I've been retired, I've ramped that up. And so my woodworking, my skill level now is I turn bowls. And I go up to about 10-inch in diameter, variety of shapes. I make furniture, which showed you a picture. The nicest thing I've done is that a mission style end table out of white oak. And one of the nicest things to happen is that I trained a fellow named John Strom who's in practice in Dixon, Illinois. And people don't know this that aren't into woodworking. That's a lot of good hardwood from Dixon. Also, Ronald Reagan's from Dixon. But John loaded up a whole variety of hardwood, put it in his pickup truck, drove it out and gave it to me. And that's where the wood in that table comes from. And so that was very special. My other hobbies, I'm into trains. I have HO trains. I have it all on a 4x8 board because that's all the space my wife will allow me.
Will allot for that hobby,
You know how these women are, they kind of tell you what you do. I have 22 switches, a turntable, and I'm working on that. I have an old-fashioned dark room, still doing work in black and white, and still using 35 millimeter primarily, and high-speed 300-400 ASA film, which I buy in bulk rolls. And roll my own film. It's like making your own cigarettes. Well, I roll my own film and develop it. And I hope now that Kodak is bankrupt, I hope I still can get my rolls at Tri-X. And actually get my photo supplies from Calumet, which is a photography place in Chicago. And they're great at shipping out to them. And then I like wine. I'm not sure you say that's a hobby or it's an addiction or a disease. My wife thinks it's a disease. Sometimes she'll say it may be an addiction. And I just love wine. I specialize, I at least work at Bordeaux and Burgundies from France and California Reds. And And then what else do I do? Oh, ride bikes, and, stuff
To
like
keep
that.
fit.
Keep fit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. When for me, if to do my fitness routine, takes over an hour every day. And then if we do hiking, the longest we've ever gone is 10 miles, but we hike between 5 and 8, usually at least once a week up in the mountains. And when you add it, that takes a whole day. And so when you're in practice, you can't do that. And so I figured that's what I'm doing to try to extend this life, or at least good life, as much as I can.
Say a few words about the 3 gavels that are in service in the societies.
Well, the first gavel I did for the Midwest Vascular Surgery Society, and as you know, it's a younger society, and we figured, well, we can do that, and Mark Adams, who was a transplant surgeon, actually was my chairman for a while before he passed on. He helped turn the barrel of that because he was much better with a lathe than I turned the handle, and it's made out of Wisconsin cherry. So if you look at it, I also made a box to go with it. Now I'm not sure that box is around, because when you start passing these gavels from president to president, was the gavel in the wooden box when you were president?
It came as a gavel.
Yeah, well, somebody has the box somewhere.
Yeah.
That was a good box.
I bet
I was disappointed in that. And then the second gavel I did was for the Society of Vascular Surgery, and Jimmy Yao asked me if I would do that. For the Midwest, I got wood from Zoology's desk. For the SVS, I got wood from the Harry Schumacher. I actually got a clock, a barometer, circular barometer. It looked like it was cherry wood. And then I got some wood from DeBakey's. They said it was his desk, but it was a hunk of wood. And I made it rectangular, so I didn't turn the head on that one, so you could put a plaque with the names of the presidents on it. And again, I think the head of that one was walnut, and the handle is cherry. And then the final one I did for the program directors in vascular surgery, and after John Porter had died, I asked his wife if she would give me his cane. And I took parts of the cane and fashioned a gavel. And I was very proud of that, but unfortunately, at one of the meetings, it was stolen, or somebody walked off with it, and I'm a little kind of disappointed they didn't take better care of it. I still have some of his cane, and I could do it
Maybe
again.
you should make another one.
I could, but they're going to have to ask me, and they're going to have to assure me they're going to look after it.
Yeah, only reasonable. Now, looking back over your publications, you've been interested in talking about and helping people understand complications in vascular surgery. How did you get the notion to focus on that important area of work?
Well, I think it is important, but I think that surgeons don't like talking about complications. I think in a sense, perhaps it highlights their mortality or their shortcomings. And as a young academic surgeon, you kind of say, well, what papers, and obviously I need to be productive. And I thought the field of complications was relatively wide open. And so I just started, with coagulation things and wound problems. And I said, I tried to be bone honest about it and not worry about what people thought, because I thought we really needed an accurate incidence and outcome of complications.
What about the books? The 4 books have been very useful to me and to other vascular surgeons. And how did you get started with the book publication?
Well, it was the same sort of thing, is that Vic Bernhardt and I were working together in Milwaukee, and we wanted to have a postgraduate course, and we started asking, well, we had to compete with Dr. Weiss, at that time Dr. Haimavici's meeting in New York, and then Dr. Berger and Dr. Yao's meeting here in Chicago, and so we just looked around, we said, well, we should no one has a meeting on complications, just purely complications. So in Milwaukee, I think in 89 or, well, Vic was still there, probably earlier than that. We had our first meeting, and I thought it went very well. And we did, like the Northwestern group does, we had a book that was published in conjunction with the meeting. And so we had 2 meetings in Milwaukee for the first 2 editions. Third one out in Arizona, because Victor had gone to University of Arizona by that time. And the 4th one, we didn't have a meeting.
You've had the good fortune to work with a number of very excellent vascular surgeons in Milwaukee. Want to say a few words about them? You started talking about Vic.
Well, Vic recruited me there,
Yeah.
and Vic was a DeBakey trained vascular surgeon, and he was a good mentor and a good friend. And so it was a very nice start to an academic career. I worked with Vic, I think, 5 years before he left to become chairman out at a hospital in Philadelphia. And Vic was interested in the academic aspect of things. We wrote papers. He had a very legitimate research going, so he really had the whole show. After Vic left, you start asking around for people, and people who were men, mostly men at that time, who were training surgeons. And Gene Strandis is somebody I knew reasonably well. I mean, obviously he was a much senior guy, and I asked him if he had any good people, and he says, "Oh, I got this guy named Bandick, top-notch guy." So I said, okay, and I got a hold of Bandick, and he couldn't come. And I was so impressed with him that I said I kept taking calls by myself for another year. And
Rather than hire someone else.
and I got Bandick the next year. And Dennis was, as anybody knows him, he's very, very bright. He's a good surgeon. He's a great teacher, good academician, everything. I mean, I was just so lucky to have somebody that good to work with. And then finally, it's time for him to go and start his own place. He went down to South Florida. And then the academic surgeons were meeting in Milwaukee, and I wasn't going to go to the cocktail party. But Gary Seabrook came back and he says, there's a lady from UCLA that we might be interested in coming here. And her name was Julie Freischlag, and I had no idea who she was. So off we went to the national meeting. It was about 6 weeks later, and I met her, and I was lucky to recruit her. And she's obviously been a star, and it's really nice. I mean, one of the greatest things in academic surgery is to be able to work with outstanding people. It is so nice to see people who are trying to do things, that are working hard, that they have a goal and a passion, and I've been blessed with that. And of course, the rest of the people I have pretty much homegrown. Gary Seabrook,
who's now in charge of the division.
I picked him when he was an intern. He didn't even know what vascular was about.
He didn't even know what he was getting into.
No, he didn't know that. Gary is a good person. He was a good resident. He just handled himself well, and he was a very good associate of mine for the last 15 years or so, ever since Julie left. And so it's been a good run for me. I'm just delighted.
Yeah, that's great. Now, another area that you've been interested in from the very beginning is hypercoagulability and coagulation issues. How did you get started thinking about that?
That's an interesting story. I remember I was in the operating room in the Old County Hospital, and I won't tell you the lady's name, and I still remember it. But it was right after there was a big article, I think in the New England Journal, saying that you should put people use prophylactic heparin, particularly in people who are a little overweight. And this lady was 48 years old. She was in for vaginal hysterectomy. She was probably 50, 60 pounds overweight. And then the OB/GYN people did just what they said to do. They gave her sub-Q heparin, and the 5th post-op day, they called me and they said, hey, this lady's leg is white. So I took her down, and arteries are absolutely normal, except they had all this white clot in them. Well, the thing that made all that work is that there are 2 really famous people in Milwaukee's medical school. One is chemo Wilson's disease, who was on the staff of the VA years and years ago. And the other is Armin Quick. And the prothrombin time used to be called the quick prothrombin time.
That's right.
And Armin had a lab tech, a gal named Clara Hussey. And she worked for him for years, and then she went to medical school and then went to a pathology residency. But Clara was my coagulation pathologist. So I took this white clot down to Clara and I says, this is the damnedest looking clot I've ever seen. What do you think? And she came back to me a couple hours later. She says, all platelets.
Yeah.
And she wasn't sure what it was. And meanwhile, I cleaned this lady out and got a good angiogram. And then we bumped up her heparin.
Of course.
Because, sub-Q heparin wasn't good enough. We're going to really give it to her. So next, 36 hours later, I'm back in the OR again. And I ended up operating on her 3 times, and she ended up with a below-knee amputation. And finally, Clara figured out there was this antibody that she had. And in a way, I just feel kind of stupid. We should have tumbled sooner. But that started a relationship with Clara, who was a master Rosarian herself. She was my mentor in roses as well as coagulation. And so anytime I would get anything unusual in terms of clotting in the OR off, I would go to see her. And that's where all those papers came from. As you start looking for them, we got involved in antithrombin problems, some plasminogen problems. And our feeling, my feeling was the surgeon should, how a person's supposed to act. You know how blood clots and what doesn't clot. And if they're not acting right, look for trouble. And that's what we did.
Don Silver had been doing some work with heparin-induced thrombocytopenia right around that time too.
Oh yeah, and he did the academic work, if you will. He was in the lab. He showed the mechanism of action and all, no question. And I would always talk to Don or ask his insight in it. But
they were fascinating times with heparin because people were just realizing what a disaster it could be. It was very, very interesting.
Well, and heparin in a hospital today, and it was 15 years ago, whenever it was, we started writing about this, is ubiquitous. I mean, it's hard for a patient to have a major operation and be in a hospital 4 or 5, 6 days and not get heparin.
That's right. Another area that you've been interested in is the mucin and non-mucin producing staph. How did you start to focus on that?
When Dennis Bandy came and joined us from the University of Washington, he had been working on graft infections, and he had collected 17 or 19 patients with aortic graft infections, and he found in our place, an equal number. So anyway, we put these patients together, and that was the first paper he published from the medical college. And he was interested in the fact, or noted that, Staphylococcus was a predominant organism. And so then he started this series of research that identified that the bad aspect of coag-negative staph was the slime that protected it and prevented antibiotics from getting into the graft material. And in his lab, in which Gary Seabrook and a variety of, host of fellows over a 7-year period worked, I thought done some really magnificent work in terms of, showing how this happened. And I remember I was watching all this research, and I had this patient, and I'll just say her first name was Ozella, and Ozella is a lady I'd operated on 10, 12 times, aerobifemoral and revisions, and she had a fluid collection in her left groin. And I said, "Dennis, do you believe in any of your research?" He says, "Yep." And so that was the first in situ graft replacement. And I ended up with Ozella over a period of 2.5 years, end up replacing her whole graft, did muscle flaps, covering each groin. And I can say that she went on and lived another 5 years and died of heart disease. And so she died with both her legs on and pulses in her feet, which is the ultimate goal of a vascular surgery.
That's right. That's for sure.
And then we went from there, and then Dennis has carried on this work with, the beads, antibiotic-coated beads that he's now using, and I think it really was. It was taking a problem from the bedside, the operating room, to the laboratory,
And back again.
and then back again. And I thought it made a nice story. I thought it was very good work, but that was Dennis's genius.
You have been very much front and center in the relationship with the American Board of Surgery and vascular surgery. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Well, I think it's an interesting saga, and I think if you step back a few steps, you can see that I think the times have dictated what has happened. It's kind of like Toynbee used to say, that man make history, or history make man. And I think basically from the time that Jack Wiley and Jesse Thompson and Ed Garrett started with the certificate of special and added qualification in vascular surgery, to the current time where there is an independent vascular surgery board under the aegis, obviously, of the American Board of Surgery. A lot of things happened to make that easy. First of all, our big concern when we started general vascular surgery was dealing with general surgery, and general surgeons felt they were vascular surgeons. Certainly by the time I was on the American Board of Surgery, no one had that concept anymore. I mean, in fact, general surgery took a lot of the ideas and strategies that vascular had and applied them to, pancreatic, biliary, and, ICU type certificates and what have you. And the pediatric surgery board also followed our outline. And the thing is that what seems to emerge, that the competition or concern we have with general surgery is not. Then it was the interventional radiologist, and increasingly, from what my colleagues tell me, is the interventional cardiologist, as the interventional radiologists aren't there doesn't seem to be as strong a player in this as they had been. And then it makes it very easy. There's now no disagreement or conflict between vascular surgery and what we would traditionally call general surgery. And so we have the certificate that we have. And when you looked at the variety of approaches to solving this problem, we were all a lot closer than I think a lot of people realized. But my philosophy, and the reason I pursued the strategy that I did, is that if it's analogous to countries, no one wants to be a Monaco. Who cares what Monaco does? Small little country, good place to park a lot of money if you don't want to pay income taxes, but they're not a player in the world scene. And basically, when you start looking at the structure of medicine in this country, you're looking at the American Board of Medical Specialists, ACGME, and what have you, is that these are all the power or the votes you get all depend on the number of certificate holders you have. Well, there's no way we're ever going to have as many vascular surgeons as we have internists or pediatricians
or radiologists.
Radiologists.
Right.
And so And the other aspect of this is the strength in numbers is what the American board gives, and no one has ever disputed, is they have phenomenal ability to study the metrics of examinations. You know, they have a couple of PhD, at least one PhD there, and they do a phenomenal job of that. And so, you know, I'm looking at, we can get everything we want. Now we have a big brother, if you will, that helps us because they have more votes, like in getting the independent certificate, the 5-0 through. That's what I had to do. I take that through the American Board of Medical Specialists. And we had a lot of allies, and none of them were surgeons. And that's the reason that went through as well as it did. And I think at the present time we have the best of all worlds. However, times change. In the future, we may need to make changes or adapt our training or certification process to better represent vascular surgery, our patients, and protect our training.
I was going to ask you, throughout your career, to just talk about a couple of surgeons that really influenced you and who you were your heroes in surgery nationally.
Well, Dr. Thompson, obviously, because he was my vascular mentor. Paul Hodson, who was one of my professors at Nebraska, who taught me to be a knife surgeon. And he was a product of the Michigan group, and Paul, you know, gave me just incredible training. The best surgeon I ever saw work, and I just treasure the times I've spent with him, was Dr. Stanley Crawford. He was just phenomenal, and I had actually visited him one time, and he was very kind. He wanted to show me how to do thoracoabdominals, and as much as you can learn watching a couple of cases. But throughout the time after that, he was just a special, special person. And the other person that I was affected by was Dr. Bill Fry, who I thought, Dr. Fry helped me do my first gallbladder, and he was, even after I left Michigan, he was always a mentor to me, and he was the finest teaching operative surgeon that I ever saw work. I mean, he could take a resident through a case. It was just a thing of beauty, and it was so good. And probably the other person I should mention is Emmerich Szilagyi. Now, I never obviously operated with Dr. Szilagyi, but you know, I tried to model a lot of my papers on the way he did follow-up. And Dr. Szilagyi, you know, did angiograms on all his patients a year and 2 and 3. And you couldn't do that in the era that I wrote those in situ papers, but we had duplex scanners. And I could get an anatomic and physiologic picture of the anastomosis. And I remember back when Dr. Szilagyi was editor of the Journal of Vascular Surgery, and you know how tough Dr. Szilagyi was. There was a limit of 12 pages. And when Dennis and I put up that first long-term follow-up of the in situs, it was 20 pages, and he didn't cut a page. And I just said, thank you, Lord, you know, and I did. I just thought Dr. Szilagyi, and he was a cantankerous guy at times, but you know, he was just somebody I always would talk to and always keep in touch with, and I thought he had a lot to do with many of the good things in vascular surgery. And I think those were primarily the person. As soon as you mention things like that, you forget somebody, and somebody might be upset, but those are the ones I think of.
Yeah. And what about, say a few words about the operations you like to do best?
Well, I love to do carotid artery surgery. It's, you know, I do it totally with a knife. It's so precise. Even somebody who is morbidly obese, the neck is not that fat. Yeah, there's some, but the anatomy is fascinating. The stakes in terms of if you don't do it well, I mean, strokes can be catastrophic, both in terms of morbidity and mortality. But I love to do carotid artery surgery, and I had a great team. I usually worked with one anesthesiologist. I worked with one scrub nurse, and it was fun. I mean, I would have done that operation for free.
In the future, it's going to be more difficult to train vascular surgeons to be able to do things like really good carotid operations and good distal bypasses and good open abdominal surgery because they don't get as much of it anymore. Tell us how you think that's going to go as far as training people to be good not only at endovascular but also at the more difficult open procedures.
Well, I think we have emerged into an exciting time. And with the endovascular techniques, with the open things that we can do. But with that comes the responsibility to make sure that we are training people well. And in the old days, quotes, pre-1990, if a resident spent 5 years in general surgery, you pretty much, not obviously totally, but in a good program, accredited program, they would get enough experience to be very technically sound. Mm-hmm. And by and large, you didn't have to check this. Mm-hmm. And we didn't. You just submitted your cases when you took your board exams, and that was it. Now, in surgery, you look at like general surgery, open cases are vanishing. Yeah. So even if you took a general surgery training, you're not going to be trained in open surgery the way you and I were, just for the nature of the programs we go through. So the responsibility for the leadership of the SVS vascular surgery is now we have to start evaluating our output. And by that I mean, how are they trained? Is it good enough? Because we are the protectors of the American citizens. And we have to be able to assure people, our citizens of this country, that our people are well trained. We have the tools to do this, or are getting the tools, the modules the educational modules and things that they're simulators. Mm-hmm. And then I think the one thing that concerns me though is that, and I've heard great surgeons, supposedly Dr. Kirkland, who was the heart surgeon who was most recently at Alabama, said it takes a long time to be a surgeon. And the thing also, as I reflect back on my training, those times in the middle of the night when you're all alone, attending's home sleeping, you have to make a decision. And that decision may be to call them up, call her up, or ask them to come in. But that's a very important thing to do. And I don't think we have put enough relevance to that, because those are the little things. I suspect in time, when we go about 10 years and then start critically looking at this, I think the training probably is going to end up being longer, or the product that we are turning out is going to be more focused. I could see a time when the standard vascular surgeon is an endosurgeon, and that you might have to take an extra couple of years to do complex open work. Mm-hmm. And I think there'll always be some need for that, but how big a need in a country, who knows? And those are the kind of issues. And my greatest fear is that we lose the skills we have to be open surgeons, because I'm a product of my times, but that's why I went into surgery.
Well, John, it's been just great talking to you, and thank you for sharing all of your reflections. And I think there is great hope for vascular surgery, and we just have to figure out how to get this training right, don't we?
No, they're good people.
Yeah.
We are blessed in vascular surgery having some of the top people in the country make it their life's work.
Thank you.